Hello to all of you listening. I hope that you're all fit and well. You join me today as we pick up on our series that we began way back in 2022. How the time flies. It's going to be a series exploring some of the Bible's lesser known or unlikely heroes. I hope you will enjoy these sermons and take inspiration from the people that we look at. Our reading for today is taken from the book of Exodus, and we'll be looking at chapter 18, verses 7 to 23. So this is Exodus chapter 18, verses 7 to 23. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other about their well-being, and they went into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which the Lord had done for Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. And so it was, on the next day, that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said, What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone, and all the people stand before you from morning until evening? And Moses said to his father-in-law, Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another, and I make known the statutes of God and his laws. So Moses' father-in-law said to him, The thing that you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. Listen now to my voice. I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for the people, so that you may bring the difficulties to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and the laws, and show them the way in which they must walk, and the work they must do. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all this people will also go to their place in peace. This is the word of the Lord. Back in 2022, I gave you a one-off sermon entitled Unlikely Heroes of the Bible. The subject of that sermon was Enoch. I planned it as a brief interlude between major sermon series. We then began our journey through Mark's Gospel, and I put the Unlikely series on hold. Now, almost 2 years later, we are again at an interlude between major sermon series. So let's pick up on our series on Unlikely Heroes. There are no shortage of possible candidates, and I have selected 7 fascinating characters from both the Old and New Testaments. These are biblical characters whose heroic or brave acts might easily have gone unnoticed. People whose heroism might be defined as the quiet and unobtrusive kind. I am arguing here that true heroism expresses itself in a variety of different ways. And this is reflected in the definition that we read in the Cambridge Dictionary. It says that a hero is a person who is admired for having done something very brave or having achieved something great. My question to you is, who gets to define what is something great? As I'm sure you would agree, it's quite subjective. How might we define a heroic or great act? Well, let's think of some obvious examples. A firefighter rescuing someone from a burning building. A police officer facing down an armed robber. A soldier who fights against overwhelming odds to defend their comrades. A person on the beach who dives into the water to save someone drowning. We would all acknowledge that these things are representative acts of true heroism. In each case, the person put their lives on the line in order to help others. What they did took a degree of courage that is way beyond the normal. What about some great things that are not necessarily heroic? What about a sports coach, scout leader or youth worker who devotes his or her life to the young people in their care? What about someone who takes a hot meal to an elderly neighbour? How about a single parent who works 2 jobs to raise their children? Or a pastor who faithfully leads his flock? Perhaps these are not heroic acts in the truest sense, but they are things that we would recognise as being good or even great. They are things that we should acknowledge and commend. So I'm arguing that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. And this is certainly true when it comes to the Bible. According to one source that I looked at, there were 1,372 people mentioned by name in the Bible. Of these, 1,182 are men and 190 are women. Of all these people, some are recorded as being truly heroic. We read their accounts and marvel at their courage and bravery. Who might we include in this category? Who are the Bible's great heroes? Well, if we were to compile a list, we'd certainly include people like Noah, Abraham, Moses, Joshua, Rahab, David, Daniel, Stephen, Peter and Paul. These are men and one woman who we would all acknowledge as being heroic. Their acts seem far above anything we might ever hope to emulate. Would you step onto the battlefield armed with only a slingshot to face a giant like David did? Would any of us continue to preach Christ as we were stoned to death like Stephen? We recognise that God empowered these people to do mighty things. But we also read in Scripture the accounts of people whose heroism was more relatable, a more down-to-earth kind of heroism. Men and women who were loyal, faithful and dependable. Men and women who were wise and helpful. God used these people in less dramatic, but no less important ways. They exhibited a kind of heroism to which we can all aspire. The word hero, of course, does not appear in the Bible. In fact, the whole idea of hero worship runs contrary to the message of Scripture. A hero, after all, is a human being raised up and admired because of something they have done. Often such a person is deemed worthy of praise or adoration. There can be a great danger in this. This, after all, is the place that we should reserve for the Lord Jesus Christ. So we always have to guard against creating idols, and heroes can very easily be idols. It only takes a moment, after all, for us to take our eyes off Christ and to focus them on a human being. However, with that being said, the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews lists saints who had a great faith. We commonly refer to these men and women as heroes of the faith. What makes these believers heroes? Why are they forever memorialized in this particular chapter of the Bible? They are regarded as heroes for 2 reasons. Firstly, they believed in the Lord, not just for salvation, but for every aspect of life. They sought to honour God, even when it was difficult or challenging to do so. Secondly, they chose to trust God's promises, rather than pursuing the temporary pleasures of the flesh. So let us bear this in mind as we look at some unlikely heroes. Our unlikely hero for consideration today is Jethro. Who was Jethro? The subject of our study today is Jethro. How much do you know about him? Probably you've heard the name, but maybe you don't remember very much about him. So it's appropriate to begin by asking, who was Jethro? We can answer that question in 3 ways. Firstly, he was a Midianite. Secondly, he was a priest. And thirdly, he was Moses' father-in-law. We know very little about the first 2. There is even debate as to where exactly Midian was. We know roughly where it was located, but its exact boundaries are debated even today. We also don't know very much about his priestly status, although as we go on I will make one or two comments about it. However, when it comes to the third statement, we know quite a lot. This means that Jethro is inextricably connected to Moses. He only appears in Scripture in relation to Moses. He is never mentioned as an independent actor. Therefore, to tell you Jethro's story, I have to begin with Moses. Moses' story is well known to most believers. It's one of the Bible's most fascinating and overarching stories. You cannot really appreciate God's ultimate salvific plan without first understanding how he dealt with his chosen people through Moses. So if you've been a Christian for any length of time, you will be very familiar with much of Moses' story. Let me very briefly summarise what we read about in chapters 1 and 2 of the book of Exodus. These chapters outline the situation for the Israelites in Egypt at that time, and they tell us about the birth of the man that God would use to lead his people to safety. Moses was born in Egypt to his parents Amram and Jochebed, who were both from the house of Levi. His birth occurred around 300 years after the death of Joseph. There had been considerable change in those intervening years. In Genesis 46:27, we read that the original number of Israelites who moved to Egypt to settle with Joseph was 70. This comprised Jacob, Joseph's father, and his extended family. Things were good for the Israelites in Egypt, and the people of Israel multiplied greatly. They become so numerous that this is seen as a risk to Pharaoh. He reasons that if they were to rise up or to join their enemies, they could bring down the country. Pharaoh, as a consequence, wants to reduce their numbers. Pharaoh's first plan was to make life hard for the Israelites. If life is tough, the will or the desire not to have such large families might occur. This does not have the desired effect. Despite the hardships, many more babies are still being born. He then orders the Hebrew midwives to kill any male babies. They refuse to do this, and again the Israelite population soars. Finally, Pharaoh commands that all the Hebrew baby boys are to be thrown into the river. Moses, we are told, was a beautiful baby. All parents think that about their children, of course. Actually, there is some debate as to what is actually meant by the term beautiful, tov in the Hebrew. It may indeed refer to his physical appearance, but it also may point to something beyond. It may well mean that there was something special about this child. His mother strove to keep him safe by trying to hide him for 3 months, but after this time she realised it was impossible to hide him in the house, so she came up with a new plan. She built a basket, actually an ark, placed him inside, and put the ark in the reeds along the bank of the River Nile. I should add that Moses' sister was sent to watch him and to ensure his safety. Moses is discovered by the Pharaoh's daughter, who has gone to the river to bathe. A little tactical crying by Moses causes the girl to feel great compassion for the infant, and she effectively adopts Moses. He gets to go and live with his own family as an infant, but when he is grown up, he is invited to come and live at the royal palace. He remained at the royal palace for around 40 years. We must assume that in this time he lived like a member of the royal family. He would have received the finest education. This would have included being instructed in geography, history, grammar, writing, literature, philosophy, and music. He also enjoyed all the other luxuries afforded to a person of high rank, riding around in a chariot and eating the finest foods. All goes well until one day Moses stumbles across an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. It's interesting that despite his proximity to the Egyptians, and presumably living as they did, he had never lost his sense of identity as an Israelite. Seeing this act of cruelty against another Israelite incenses Moses. Assessing the situation first to ensure that he is not being observed, Moses kills the Egyptian and buries him in the sand. Sadly for him, it was not the perfect crime. He believed that he had got away with murder, but unfortunately the news had spread. Moses is now a wanted man. Pharaoh sought to capture and kill him. Moses therefore is forced to flee for his life. He ends up in Midian. It's difficult today to be precise regarding the exact boundaries of the land of Midian, but generally speaking we are talking about an area to the south of the Arabian Peninsula. It was a rugged desert country. How far was this journey for Moses? Well, it was a long trip. Depending on the exact route taken, we're talking about a journey of between 800 and 1,000 kilometres. Why, you may wonder, did he not go to Canaan or even to Syria? Well, there was actually a good reason for this. There existed a treaty between Ramesses II and the Hittite king to the effect that fugitives along this northern route to Syria would be arrested and extradited. So Moses very wisely goes southeast. When Moses arrives in Midian, he sits down by a well. As he's sitting there, 7 women arrive to draw water for their flocks. There was some kind of fracas between them and some shepherds, and the women are driven away. Up steps chivalrous Moses and helps the women to tend to their flocks. These women turn out to be the daughters of Reuel, the priest of Midian. Well, who were the Midianites? The Midianites were descendants of Abraham through Keturah. Therefore we have good reason to believe that Reuel was a true priest who worshipped the true God, and that he was not a pagan priest. To support this view we might also add the fact that the name Reuel means friend of God. Others argue that he was just a God-fearing man who had not yet come to place his full confidence or trust in Yahweh. This man, this priest, Reuel or Ragul, as he is known in Numbers, is none other than Jethro. If you'd like to refer to him by his Hebrew name, it is Jethro. The name Jethro may actually be more of a title meaning His Excellency, but I will refer to him from now on as Jethro. When Jethro finds out about the kindness of Moses, he invites him to come over and to dine with them. Things obviously go well because Moses decides to live in that area with Jethro for the next 40 years. We know very little about what Moses did during these years. The assumption must be that he worked hard and helped look after the flocks. So let me just underscore this fact. Moses, the mighty titan of faith, who God would use to help save his people, spent 40 years as a humble shepherd, from the royal palace to tending sheep. One thing, though, we do know that happened to him at this time was that Moses married. Jethro gives him one of his daughters, a woman named Zipporah, meaning bird, to be his wife. They will go on to have 2 sons, Gershom and Eliezer. Moses may have forgotten about the Israelites back in Egypt, but God certainly had not. When they called out for his help in their time of suffering, God steps up. He needs a man to be his spokesman to the Pharaoh, and Moses gets the call at the burning bush. Following this, he returns to Jethro to ask for his permission to return to Egypt. That exchange is interesting. We find it recorded in Exodus chapter 4, verse 18. Please let me go and return to my brethren who are in Egypt, and see whether they are still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, Go in peace. You will note that Moses doesn't give Jethro the real reason for his trip. He's not just visiting to check on the well-being of his countrymen. Perhaps he just felt it was too fantastic and would rather let God demonstrate his word through fulfilling it. It does, however, demonstrate that Moses was a caring and thoughtful man. He wanted to do right by Jethro, and so sought his permission to go. Jethro, too, shows that he is a wise and caring man. He could have said no or tried to make it difficult for Moses. Instead, he tells him to go in peace. Moses leaves and travels back to Egypt with his wife and children. Later, possibly during the time of the plagues, Moses sends them back to Midian to be with Jethro. The next time Jethro steps into the pages of Scripture is following the Exodus. In order to find him, we must jump ahead to chapter 18 of Exodus. Obviously, I'm skipping over a lot of information here, but the focus of our attention today is Jethro, and not Moses and the Israelites escaping from Egypt. Chapter 18 details how Moses and his father-in-law Jethro are reunited. Moses and the people of Israel are camped somewhere in the Sinai. The chapter reveals a lot about Jethro, and it highlights why I am nominating him today as an unlikely hero. News, it seemed, had reached Jethro concerning all that God had done for the people of Israel. The greatness of God's work through Moses had become known to the surrounding peoples. We don't know how exactly Jethro received this news. Had travellers come and reported what had happened, or had Moses himself sent word via a messenger to Jethro? Whatever the case, Jethro is greatly moved by this amazing news. He determines to take his daughter and grandsons so that they can be reunited with Moses. Jethro clearly recognized how important it was that Moses have his family around him. Again, we cannot be sure whether it was Moses who asked him to bring them, or whether he just took the initiative himself. Either way, it would be good for Moses to have the support and encouragement of his family. When Jethro arrives, Moses goes out to meet him. Verse 7 reveals that they had a very moving encounter. Moses, despite being the leader of a nation, has a great deal of respect and affection for this man. He honours him as both his father-in-law and as a legitimate priest of God. It speaks well of Moses that his position of leadership did not make him proud. How easy it is for powerful leaders to think that the world revolves around them. Moses explains in detail all that God has done for his people. Jethro's response demonstrates his wisdom and understanding. In verses 9 and 10 we learn that he rejoiced in the Lord and asked that God be blessed. Clearly, as a priest, he recognized God as being sovereign and supreme, but hearing exactly how God had easily overcome the gods of Egypt brought home to him exactly how awesome God truly was. He correctly identifies who it was that had delivered the Israelites. As human beings, we tend to look towards human leaders. We want politicians, generals or kings who can guide us to victory or prosperity. If battles, wars or the economy prosper, we shower our human leaders with praise and adoration. We would do well to remember that all human leadership exists only because God permits it. He is ultimately sovereign. So Jethro rightly recognized that it was God and not Moses who deserved the credit. The success of the Exodus rested all upon God. Jethro then provides evidence for his faith by offering a burnt offering and by making sacrifices to God. Following this, Moses, Aaron and the Israelite elders ate the sacrificial meal together with Jethro. Eating together in the ancient Near East was a solemn occasion. This was because sharing a meal meant an alliance or a partnership was now formed between the participants. That's why you wouldn't sit down and share a meal with just anyone. It shows us that Jethro was respected and trusted by the leaders of Israel. How had he earned their trust? Well, obviously there was the family connection with Moses, but also the fact that he was a God-fearing man, that he showed proper reverence and respect for Yahweh. The following day, we see Jethro step forward and really provide some much-needed wisdom. On many occasions, God leads believers through the counsel of wise, qualified, trustworthy people, and this will be one such case. Moses knew that he had been singled out and called by God. He was the man chosen by the Almighty to be the leader, and this was a responsibility that he took very seriously. One of the potential dangers that can befall strong leaders is that they want to control all things at all times. They find it difficult to delegate responsibilities to others. There may be many reasons for this. Perhaps they are prideful people who believe that they are the best or the only person able to do this job. Maybe they don't think they have people beneath them capable of stepping up. In some cases, this may be the case. Those below them are not mentally or physically capable of leading. Or perhaps in Moses' case, he genuinely, albeit wrongly, thought God wanted him to do everything. So what's the particular issue here? Well, Moses was acting as a judge for the whole nation of Israel. The exact number of people who left Egypt is a hotly debated one. Some argue for a figure as low as 30,000. Others opt for the far higher figure of between 1.5 and 2.4 or even 3 million. This much higher figure is derived from the fact that the post-Exodus Israelite army numbered well over 600,000 men. When we add to this number women and children, it's not unreasonable to think that there could have been close to 2 million people living under Moses' leadership. I'm giving you this figure because I want you to imagine just how much work this involved for Moses. Among such a large group of people, there would naturally be many disputes and questions of interpretation to settle. It appears that Moses was virtually the only recognised judge in the whole nation. This meant that almost all his time was occupied in making judgment. In verse 13 we learn that from morning to evening he was engaged in this work. No matter how long he worked, however, he was unable to deal with all of the issues. And this was creating more problems as tensions and grievances between people festered. Instead of dealing quickly and efficiently with these matters, it was a long, drawn-out process that actually benefited no one. We don't want to be overly critical here of Moses. He correctly identified the importance of this work. In verse 15 and 16, he outlines his motivation. He's doing this because the people need to know and understand God's laws and statutes, and he understood that God had called him to this role. However, whilst Moses was trying to do the right thing, leading, advising and guiding the people, he was going about it in the wrong way. And that's an important takeaway from this whole story. It is possible to do the right thing, but in the wrong way. Jethro has the benefit of being an outside observer. With his keen eye and well-honed wisdom, he quickly identifies the problem. One commentary that I consulted described him as an efficiency expert. Maybe that's stretching things a little, but he clearly sees a problem and wants to fix it. Perhaps others among the Israelites had thought what Moses was doing was ill-advised, but maybe they lacked the courage to speak up or the insight to provide a solution. But not so Jethro. He has the courage and the wisdom to speak up. In verse 17, Jethro is actually quite blunt. He says, "The thing that you do is not good." As a leader, you need to develop a certain resilience to feedback and criticism. The world is full of what in sports we would call armchair quarterbacks. This refers to people who are experts in a sport from the comfort of their own living rooms. They have no real-world experience, and if given real charge over a team would almost certainly flop. This, however, does not stop them from advising the coach or manager on what they should do. The same is true in all areas of life, and even within the church. Everyone has an opinion on how the worship service could be improved. More songs, less songs, louder music, quieter music, longer sermons, shorter sermons, no sermons at all, dancing, free coffee and cookies, the list could go on. All leaders have to learn to listen politely to such people and then do what they think, guided by prayer of course, to be the best. Well, how will Moses respond to Jethro's critique? He takes it very well. This is because Jethro's criticism is based upon the actual reality of what Moses is experiencing. In verse 18, Jethro goes on to say that what Moses is doing is not good because it will eventually exhaust him. We should not forget that Moses was an 80-year-old man. If people take on too much work, there comes a point when they break down. The stress becomes too much. Most of us know how damaging and harmful stress can be in our lives. Ultimately, too much work over a long period of time results in either a mental or a physical breakdown. At this point, the affected person needs time to rest and recuperate, and are not able to do their work at all. This was the danger facing Moses. If he works himself into the ground, he will reach a point where he is of no use to God's people. Also, we must consider how we effectively use the time that we have been given. We all exist within a finite time frame. The more tasks we take on, the less time and attention we can devote to each. Let me give you an example from my own life as a pastor. I am bivocational. I have 2 jobs that certainly keep me busy. It's not always easy to balance the two. Both require a great deal of my time and creative input. I can just about manage to produce a sermon and a Bible study each week. If I have no Bible study to prepare, because it's already finished, for example, I have more time to devote to the sermon. I can do more research, find better sources, and produce a nicer PPT or video. As a result, the sermon quality is higher. But if, however, I'm particularly busy, then it easily can become stressful. If I have to do more tasks, more jobs to complete in the same amount of time, then obviously each task gets less time devoted to it. The quality and attention that I can give to each diminishes. You understand, I'm sure, what I'm saying. It's not necessarily that I cannot do all that I have to do, but rather that I cannot do all things equally well. The same applied to Moses. He couldn't devote all his time to being a judge and still do the other jobs required of a leader. So Moses is open to Jethro's good advice. Well, let us look carefully at what Jethro suggests. The first thing I want you to note is that Moses is to take all of this advice and take it before the Lord. In verse 23, Jethro finishes his advice by saying, "If God so commands you." So Moses is to take the advice before God, and only if he approves is Moses to implement it. Again, this shows just how wise a man Jethro was. Jethro begins by endorsing Moses' role and place as spiritual leader. He is to continue to stand before God for the people. This means that he is to continue to act as the representative of the people before God. In this capacity, he was to carry on bringing their difficulties or problems before God. He is also, as verse 20 highlights, to continue in his role as teacher and lawgiver. Moses is still to set the people in the direction that they should follow. So what then is to change? Well, here comes the radical and all-important policy implementation, verses 21 and 22. Instead of trying to deal with all cases, Moses is to limit himself to only the most serious or difficult cases. The less serious disputes can be settled by men elected to serve in a lesser capacity. We should note that this is not Moses neglecting his leadership duties. He will still have ultimate oversight and control. Delegation, remember, is the exercise of leadership, not the abandonment of it. These men, of course, need to be carefully selected. This is true for anyone seeking to serve God. We must scrutinize and evaluate anyone who puts themselves forward to work for the church. Terrible harm can be done when we promote the wrong or unsuitable people to positions of power. But when the proper men are found and put in place, they can be a great blessing. And this would be the case for Moses. These newly appointed judges will take much of the burden off of Moses. What a simple and yet profound solution to this difficult problem. Moses listened carefully to Jethro's advice, and then presumably after seeking God's approval, put the plan into operation. The chapter ends with Jethro and Moses parting company, Exodus 18:27. Moses will stay and lead the people, and Jethro will return to his own land and people. Again, I would argue that this points to Jethro's wisdom. He might have been tempted to stay and offer more advice. Instead, knowing that his words had been heeded and that things would now be easier for Moses, he leaves. Lessons to learn. Well, what can we learn from our unlikely hero Jethro? Jethro is presented in Scripture as being a noble, pious, truly affectionate and considerate man. That's a fine list of compliments. All of us should strive to be remembered in such glowing terms. We don't know what else he accomplished in his life. Was he a good father? Did he treat his family and servants, if he had them, well? Was he a good priest who guided his people in a way that pleased and honoured God? The answers to these questions cannot be known. All we know of this interesting man are contained across these few chapters in Exodus and a brief mention in Numbers chapter 10. But this does not mean, however, that he is not useful or instructive to study. Far from it. He teaches us some valuable lessons. So as we bring this sermon to a close, I want to highlight 5 areas in which Jethro excelled. It is for these reasons that I am nominating Jethro as an unlikely hero. Number 1. He recognized the importance of family and worked towards unity and not division. Jethro was instrumental in reuniting Moses with his wife and children. He understood the value and importance of the family. Today we live in a world in which the family unit is constantly being attacked. But Jethro knew that Moses needed a supportive family around him. It's lonely and stressful when you have to lead and take big decisions. So Moses, I'm sure, took great comfort in coming back to his tent each evening and being surrounded by his loving wife and children. So Jethro was a hero because he worked towards family unity and not division. Number 2. He recognized who is ultimately in charge and worthy of praise. As we saw, Jethro acknowledged that it was God who had done all the mighty works in rescuing his people. Certainly God had used Moses, but all the real honour and praise was God's. Jethro realised that and acted appropriately. He might have acted with pride and boasted to people that the hero of the day was his son-in-law Moses, but he never did this. Instead, he openly rejoiced in God and led others to do the same. So Jethro was a hero because he recognised the power, might and glory of God and gave him the praise he deserved. Number 3. He recognised where a problem existed and offered a practical, helpful solution. Jethro was not content just to sit back and let others get on with things. He clearly looked carefully at how things were operating and saw an issue. He identified that there was a problem that later on could escalate and lead to more serious issues. Moses, in trying to do the right thing, was exhausting himself and potentially putting the nation in danger. It's one thing to identify a problem, but quite another to provide a practical, sensible solution. There used to be a lady attending this church who often noted things that she thought was wrong. "I don't like this. There is a problem with that. Why is that happening?" Unfortunately, though, she never had any kind of solution to these problems. But this was not the case with Jethro. He provided a very sensible and practical way to solve this problem. He presented it to Moses in a thoughtful way, which ensured that it was well received and would benefit the most people. So Jethro was a hero because he recognised where the problem existed and offered a practical, helpful solution. Number 4. He recognised when his work was done and left people to it. Some people never know when enough is enough. They want to stay around and continue to offer more helpful advice. I remember the chorus to a Michelle Shocked song, which goes, "The secret to a long life is knowing when it's time to go." The song is actually about a bank robber who avoids capture by always leaving at just the right time. Jethro also knew when it was time to go. He had imparted his wisdom. Moses had taken it on board and implemented it. There was nothing more for Jethro to do. He was a hero because he recognised when his work was done and then left people to it. And fifthly and finally, he recognised the importance of teamwork. Finally, Jethro is a hero because he encouraged Moses to delegate, to think about others, to build and trust a team. Leaders cannot do everything. The bigger an enterprise becomes, the less likely it is that they can lead it well on their own. All successful leaders eventually realise this. Elon Musk has good leaders who he trusts to implement his vision. He remains the figurehead, but I'm sure he doesn't micromanage every aspect of his business. He learned long ago to delegate and encourage others to take responsibility for things. So for Moses, electing helpers was a win-win situation. He reduced the burden upon himself, and he helped create a new layer of strong and wise leaders. Jethro then is a hero for helping Moses recognise the importance of teamwork. For these 5 reasons, I nominate Jethro as an unlikely Bible hero.
And Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back with her 2 sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom. For Moses said,
"I have been a stranger in a foreign land."
And the name of the other was Eleazar. For he said, "The God of my father was my help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh." And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped at the mountain of God. Now he had said to Moses,
"I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you, with your wife, and her 2 sons with her."
So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law, bowed down, and kissed him. And they asked each other about their well-being, and they went into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had come upon them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Then Jethro rejoiced for all the good which the Lord had done for Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said,
"Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and who has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all the gods, for in the very thing in which they behaved proudly, he was above them."
Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and other sacrifices to offer to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. And so it was, on the next day, that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood before Moses from morning until evening. So when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did for the people, he said,
"What is this thing that you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit, and all the people stand before you from morning until evening?"
Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a difficulty, they come to me, and I judge between one and another. And I make known the statutes of God and his laws.
The thing that you do is not good. Both you and these people who are with you will surely wear yourselves out. For this thing is too much for you. You are not able to perform it by yourself. Listen now to my voice. I will give you counsel, and God will be with you. Stand before God for the people, so that you may bring the difficulties to God. And you shall teach them the statutes and the laws, and show them the way in which they must walk, and the work they must do. Moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. And let them judge the people at all times. Then it will be that every great matter they shall bring to you, but every small matter they themselves shall judge. So it will be easier for you, for they will bear the burden with you. If you do this thing, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all this people will also go to their place in peace.
So Moses heeded the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he had said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10s. So they judged the people at all times. The hard cases they brought to Moses, but they judged every small case themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way to his own land.